Suikoden, developed by Konami and released for the Sony PlayStation in 1995, was a pioneering JRPG for Sony's first home console. Released before the likes of Final Fantasy VII, Suikoden was at the forefront of RPGs at the time, positioning itself as one of the finest games on the platform. What set Suikoden apart from other RPGs was its rich storytelling, expansive band of characters, polished sound design and score, and its profound handling of themes of love, war, and politics. Loosely based on The Water Margin, one of the 4 great classical novels of Chinese literature, Suikoden uses its source material to great effect, expanding upon a mythology to feature anthropomorphic party members, 300-year-old guardians of ancient runes, vampires, and of course, talking swords. While there are some Western fantasy elements that seep into this mythology, Suikoden is generally rooted in Eastern culture, strengthening its world-building and distinguishing itself from more traditional games of the genre. This desire for uniqueness was common for JRPGs of the early PlayStation era, with Wild Arms releasing around the same time, a game that uses an American Western aesthetic. Another aspect that made Suikoden distinctive was its use of highly detailed sprite work. In a time when developers were showcasing the hardware's technical prowess by utilizing 3D, Suikoden instead blended 2D and 3D together, and in turn created an RPG that looked marginally better than most early PlayStation games, which featured unattractive, blocky character models. The most unique aspect to Suikoden, and something that is idiosyncratic to the series to this day, is its profuse character roster, boasting 108 recruits, with most of them being used as actual battle combatants. The game draws the player into its army building mechanic in a way that feels personal and well earned. Each one of these recruits serve a unique purpose to your army, showcasing their distinct personalities in a way that is unseen in most other JRPGs. It's a testament to the series as a whole, and is an impressive feat by creator Yoshitaka Murayama to design a game that is still so relevant and enjoyable nearly 30 years after its release. In 1994, following Konami's cancellation of its very own portable console, one of the RPGs that was being developed for the system would eventually go on to become Suikoden. Reworked from the ground up, this new RPG would unshackle itself from the limitations of portable hardware and utilize the power of disc-based gaming for Sony's PlayStation. Initially being hired as a bug tester for Konami, Yoshitaka Murayama eventually teamed up with his contemporary Junko Kawano to create an RPG for the Sony PlayStation, as Nintendo's hardware limitations of their cartridge-based systems constrained the ambitions of RPG developers at the time. Murayama and Kawano joined Konami at the same time and were known to go out drinking together with other contemporaries from the company. Together, the pair were placed in the PlayStation RPG development team by Konami and set their hearts on creating an RPG with an extensive character roster, each with their own eccentric traits and personalities. Both were influenced by popular manga and video games of the time, such as Dragon Ball, Captain Tsubasa, and Dragon Quest V, with Murayama studying the fighting balance and data information during his playthrough of the game. But perhaps the most important piece of media that would inspire Suikoden was one of the 4 great novels of Chinese literature, The Water Margin, written in the 1300s during the Ming Dynasty. A tale of uprising, Water Margin features a band of 108 outlaws who come together as a small army in an attempt to topple the government. With its 108 stars of destiny, your recruitable party members, Suikoden closely mirrors this central narrative. Konami was fond of the idea of basing the story off this classic piece of literature, and bolstered the development team, as creating 108 distinct characters was no small feat, with Murayama having his team members pitch new characters for the story every day during development. Being a fan of popular manga of the time, Murayama saw the strengths of supporting roles in titles such as Saint Seiya and Dragon Ball, and wanted the player to discover characters they liked or related to. During an interview in the Untold History of Japanese Game Developers, Murayama states that if people can find among the cast a character that they can empathize with, then I'm very happy. In order to appeal to a wider audience, Murayama wanted to produce a blend of Chinese aesthetics with Western fantasy elements, not wanting to rely too heavily on the game's source material. The ingenious culture clash between these aesthetics is what gives Suikoden its uniquely eccentric charm, while also exacerbating the regional tension at the heart of war which runs through the game's story and world building. Perhaps another influence on Suikoden's large and quirky party roster was Dragon Quest V. In Chunsoft's masterpiece of a JRPG, your party combatants largely comprise different enemy types found around the world. A sort of proto-Pokemon, the player can recruit and tame various enemies found across the world map, and store them in a travelling convoy to journey with you throughout the game. While there are side characters who join your party later on in the story, the majority of Dragon Quest V is played with these monsters in your battle party. Echoing Suikoden's spotlight on misfits and the power of those who have been cast out to the fringes of society, I feel Murayama was influenced by this focus on an unconventional JRPG party, and perhaps let this design choice seep into his own development of Suikoden. Both games also carry the macabre themes of loss and death and explore family dynamics in a way that few games accomplish. RPG Haven wrote of Dragon Quest V that what makes the game great is how its other elements tie into each other through the cohesive narrative, everything contributing to the game's goal of letting you experience this hero character's life. The story could only be interesting in the context of a game, and I'd say that's a decent recipe when writing a JRPG. Son of the great general of the Scarlet Moon Empire, and also a newly recruited foot soldier in the Empire's army, Suikoden's main character, Tyr, is thrust into a world of conflict with his family friends while undertaking a reconnaissance mission for the Imperial Army, soon discovering the levels of corruption that plague his homeland and its government. Forced to flee the capital city of Gregminster, Tyr soon meets Victor, a member of the rebellion, whose aim is to overthrow the nefarious Empire. Tyr is soon enlisted into the Liberation Army and swiftly becomes its leader, poised to recruit more members to bolster their offensive capabilities. Suikoden's war and political elements carry adult themes of genocide, patricide, and racial prejudice, and were more nuanced than most video games of the time. While the game's story is objectively straightforward, how Murayama tackles these heavy themes is through the game's superabundant cast of mavericks. The focus of the game suddenly shifts, and the strengths of its storytelling lie in how these malcontents relate to each other and their motivations for banding together for the cause of revolution. This negates the rather stereotypical good defeating evil trope that is common in most JRPGs. While some characters can be rather one-dimensional and narrow-sighted, the sheer number of divergent personalities combine to make up a multifaceted world where individuality reigns supreme, and freedom of expression is a power in itself. In an interview on the Suikoden revival movement on Facebook, Murayama stated, "I drew up a vast array of characters of varying social political backgrounds and creeds, and fleshed out how they would each react in this wartime situation, but anything beyond that is the player's interpretation. With so many factors and multifaceted viewpoints intertwining in a war, I find it impossible to simply label it as good or evil." Even the quirky personalities of the Empire's army generals shine through, where in most other titles of the genre, these generals can often be rather simplified or generic, falling into a stern heterosexual stereotype, and painted as lunatics hell-bent on killing. Instead, Suikoden features characters with flamboyancy and gender fluidity that is rarely seen in most games even today. Suikoden's cast is truly varied in this regard, with some party members who join your ensemble coming from a place of immortality, betrayal, or criminality. One later recruit that features early in the game's narrative attempts to drug you and rob your team of their possessions, but is later enamored by your fame and influence in the world as the story progresses and your army grows in size. By featuring characters who are unethical or forced into a world of criminality, Suikoden deftly showcases the current state of the nation, without the need for explicit exposition. Other characters that feature as part of your army include thieves, pirates, and gamblers. This adds a deep layer of authenticity to the game, and it's one of the strongest portrayals of the nuanced nature of war and society that I've seen in a video game. War is rarely one-dimensional, and fighting for justice may not be a catalyst for certain recruits of your army. That party member who attempted to drug you at the beginning of the game now joins your army because he sees you as the likely victor of the conflict, saving his own skin and establishing his position in a new alliance that may form following the conclusion of the war. Another character who challenges the conventional JRPG party tropes is a recruit named Sarah, a simple mage living in the remote port town of Kirov. Tyr finds her in need of soap. Once this fetch quest is completed, she joins the Liberation Army not only as a maid for your castle fortress, but an actual battle combatant. In most forms of media, a character such as this would be relegated to a mere extra in the background, but what Suikoden offers is inclusivity, showcasing the strengths of those who you would least expect, with Sarah going on to become a fan favourite character in the series. Deeper themes that feature in Suikoden are those of xenophobia, genocide, and grief. While the stereotypical squabbles between elves and dwarves in most fantasy works are there for light comic relief, like in Dungeon Meshi or Lord of the Rings, in Suikoden it is used to demonstrate the fractured state of the Empire, featuring two races that not only despise each other, but wish for each other's destruction. This conflict is not resolved by the end of the game, and there is no conventional scene of the two races reluctantly teaming up together to defeat evil. While there is a section of the game that features the dwarves holed up in their village to honour their lifelong defensive duty to protect their vault, there are no recruitable dwarves in the game. This solidifies the portrayal of a race that are perhaps fighting their own war, and have no desire to bear arms for a cause that doesn't benefit them. This echoes the point of Suikoden wanting to demonstrate a more complex view on war, and reinforces the game's heavier themes and darker undertones. Another aspect of Suikoden that is handled with depth is its portrayal of grief. The main character, Tyr, holds one of the 27 true runes, the Soul Eater, a rune that enhances its power by consuming the souls of those who are closest to its holder. Suikoden presents multiple heavy-hitting deaths throughout the game, but manages to offer each one as a meditation on different possible manifestations of grief. While Tyr harnesses this grief to enhance his rune's power, Emperor Barbarossa allows his own grief to lead him down a path of hopelessness and torment. Grief plagues and consumes him, becoming increasingly insular to the point of abandoning his nation. By contrast, Tyr is outgoing in his grief, relying on the power of others to help him through his pain. This disparity in managing feelings of loss and despondency leads a complex humanity to the game's storytelling, and is a nuanced and mature approach to such a heavy theme. By not simply making Emperor Barbarossa a mad tyrant, the game instead offers a more solemn and even relatable characterization, with the Emperor abandoning his empire rather than destroying it firsthand, allowing others to influence and corrupt the nation in his stead. Another way Suikoden reinforces its powerful themes is through the game's incredibly stirring soundtrack. From vibrant town themes to dramatic battle compositions, Miki Higashino, Konami veteran and composer of the Gradius soundtrack, creates a score that radiates emotion during iconic moments of the game. Higashino cites Maurice Ravel as one of her musical influences, and this impressionist impact on her work does well to encapsulate some of the game's more Western influences and aesthetics. This classical music approach enhances the game's more earnest sensibilities, whilst the Eastern town theme of Eternal Flow helps firmly locate the player within the geography of its game world. Higashino spoke of the game's soundtrack during an interview with Square Enix Music, stating, "I realised that the soundtrack couldn't all be depicted using a single genre of music. On top of that, the game was on a massive scale, and there was no doubt that this world was unlike anything seen before in an RPG. So I decided to compose something completely different from the music in a Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest." Other musical tracks such as Touching Theme envelop the player in emotion during key moments of the game, particularly during a companion's demise. Higashino's iconic soundtrack has created a deep level of nostalgia for a lot of early players of Suikoden, but also for newcomers of the franchise. It's rare for a game to trigger a player's nostalgia for a video game they've never played, but her impeccable use of music encapsulates a special era of gaming and had me reminiscing over a bygone era during my first playthrough of Suikoden nearly 30 years after its release. The limitations of the hardware required Higashino and the Konami sound team to use stock sounds for certain sound effects in the game. Dragons become elephants. The error sound effect in the game's menus is a duck's quack. Yet this only adds to Suikoden's charms, demonstrating a level of creativity through limitation, which is too often taken for granted in the modern gaming space. Higashino has spoken of these limitations by stating, "Everyone on Konami's sound staff, not just I, spent countless hours working on music and sound effects, trying to overcome the limitations of the sound systems we worked with. You had to be persistent and keep going through the process of trial and error, just the image that one holds of a Japanese salaryman. Watching them, my perceptions of music and work changed dramatically." This all adds to a bygone era sensibility that permeates through Suikoden, and is perhaps another reason why the game's OST and sound effects exert a level of nostalgia for many old and new players alike. Murayama has spoken about this golden era of RPGs by stating, "Modern RPGs take a tremendous amount of resources to make. In the PS1 days, Japan was still a very robust game market, allowing for the creation of many ambitious titles, including Suikoden. Entertainment is, and always has been, a gamble. I believe that once we've stopped innovating, we can only go downhill. The current situation is not exactly ideal." Resident Arc eloquently spoke of Suikoden's soundtrack being a trigger for nostalgia by stating, "I'm sure all of you are familiar with that feeling you get when you hear a classic piece of music from a game you grew up with, and you're suddenly floored with an array of emotions. It almost seems like with one track, the entire experience flashes before your eyes. You remember the room you used to sit in when you played it, the friends you had at the time, the excitement you felt as you put the cartridge or disc in the console, not knowing what you were in for, and how you were moved while witnessing the story's most impactful moments for the first time. Suikoden isn't even a game I grew up with, yet when I hear certain tracks from the OST, I get that feeling, almost as if I had played it when I was 9 years old." Suikoden is an incredibly important game that has gone on to inspire and perhaps influence many games that followed. From the base building and character recruiting of Metal Gear Solid 5 and Skies of Arcadia, Suikoden was a milestone JRPG that still holds relevance today. With a storyline full of political intrigue and Murayama's skillful handling of heavy themes like genocide and grief, Suikoden more than holds up in the modern age of gaming. The game's fan base treasured this title, and I've had the pleasure of interacting with these fans while streaming my first playthrough on my Twitch channel. Many fans of the series cite the game's sequel, Suikoden 2, as the gold standard for the series, but the community are all in agreement that the sheer influence and importance of the first title is something that should be cherished. The level of appreciation and nostalgia that runs through the Suikoden community is unlike anything I've experienced, and has consolidated my own appreciation for this game. What Murayama was able to achieve through one of the PlayStation 1's first JRPGs is nothing short of incredible. Its themes of friendship and family have influenced me as a person, with its soundtrack triggering my own nostalgia trip of me and my brother playing Final Fantasy VII for the first time as kids. Suikoden allowed me to create my own small community of players across the world who hold this title so dear to their hearts. I'm forever grateful to Murayama in creating a title such as this, and his legacy will live on through this phenomenal work of art.